Wednesday, 14th of December 2016. 3:47 p.m. Heathrow Airport. A suitcase slid onto a carousel it had no business being on. To most travelers, it was invisible, just another piece of luggage circling past tired eyes. But to investigators it was a red flag, the moment that exposed a pipeline worth millions, and a betrayal that reached deep inside Britain's most trusted airport. This wasn't just smuggling. It was corruption. Staff with access to every gate, every runway, every bag, turning that access into a weapon. And here's the hard truth. If insiders can sell out an airport, how safe do you think the rest of us really are? That's why this story matters. And if you believe these cases should never be buried or forgotten, don't just watch quietly, drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe. Because the more people who see stories like this, the harder it is for corruption to hide in the dark. Heathrow Airport. A place that runs like a machine, moving more than 75 million passengers a year. To the outside world it looks unshakable. Security checks, surveillance cameras, uniforms that reassure every traveler that they are safe. But in 2016 investigators would learn the truth. It wasn't the passengers who posed the greatest threat. It was the staff. The very people trusted to keep the airport secure had become the weak link in Britain's defenses. At the center of it all was a man named Joyce Jury, better known among colleagues as Jury. By job title he was just another baggage handler. By access he was one of the most powerful people in Heathrow. Baggage handlers live in the shadows of air travel. They're rarely noticed, yet they control everything passengers assume is safe. The containers beneath the aircraft, the tugs that move luggage across runways, the carousels where families wait with anticipation. With his full airside clearance, Jury could enter areas most people would never see. He could drive across restricted zones, move containers between terminals, even step inside secure luggage bays without a second glance. And for years no one questioned him. To colleagues his movements looked routine. To passengers invisible. But to the network operating in the shadows he was their golden ticket. Jury wasn't alone. His right-hand man was Muhammad Ali, another baggage handler from SMUGGLE. Ali shared the same privileges, the same access, the same invisibility. Together they became the perfect inside team. One leading, one following, both feeding information into a wider machine that thrived on secrecy. To outsiders this might sound like petty theft. A suitcase slipped through here, a bag diverted there. But what Jury and Ali were part of was far bigger. A fully fledged cocaine pipeline. The system was chillingly simple. Step 1, South America. At airports in Brazil, corrupt ground staff loaded cocaine into ordinary suitcases. They weren't crude packages taped with warning signs. They looked like any other traveler's belongings, tagged, sealed, and ready for the hold. Step 2, the flight. British Airways planes crossed the Atlantic carrying passengers, families, business executives, and hidden among them a payload worth millions. Step 3, the insiders. When the flights landed in London, Jury and Ali already knew exactly which bags carried the drugs. They had been tipped off in advance. Photographs of the luggage, its color, brand, even the tags, had been sent to London before the aircraft touched down. Step 4, the handover. The bags were quietly shifted to the wrong carousel, placed in reach of couriers who never raised suspicion. Some of those couriers arrived on domestic flights, where customs checks were non-existent. They walked straight into the baggage hall, picked up the pre-identified cases and wheeled them out into the night. For months it worked flawlessly. A system hidden in plain sight, running through Britain's busiest airport. And what made it terrifying was not just the drugs. It was the betrayal. Because without the insiders the system collapsed. Without Jury, without Ali, those bags would have stayed locked inside security zones. The entire conspiracy hinged on staff trusted by millions of passengers every day. And here's where I want to ask you something. Imagine this. You land after a long flight, collect your bag and walk out of the airport. Would you ever think twice about the staff who handled your luggage? Would you ever imagine that the same hands could be moving cocaine worth millions? It's uncomfortable, isn't it? But that's the point. Crime like this thrives because ordinary people never suspect the system itself. Behind Jury and Ali stood a wider cast of characters. Priya Mungra, Jury's brother-in-law, became the go-between, keeping handlers and organizers connected. Wilfred Asu, based in Stoke Newington, managed the couriers, arranging their flights and timing their arrivals. Above them, men like Michael Sutherland and Mark Agoro handled distribution once the cocaine left Heathrow. Each role mattered. Each person was a cog in a machine that reached from Rio de Janeiro to the streets of London. But every empire has a weakness. And for this one the cracks were about to show. Because while jury thought he was invisible, someone had already noticed a single mistake. A suitcase tagged from Rio had appeared on the wrong carousel, the one reserved for domestic passengers. To the untrained eye it was nothing. But to border force officers, it was the anomaly that would unravel everything. And from that moment on, Heathrow was no longer just an airport. It was a crime scene under surveillance. If you agree that stories like this should never be ignored, don't just watch in silence. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe. Because by doing that, you're helping us shine a light on crimes most people would never hear about otherwise. And the more light we shine, the harder it is for corruption to hide. Every great crime story has a cast of characters. And the Heathrow conspiracy was no different. From the outside, it looked like a simple operation. Bags moved from one carousel to another. But behind that illusion was a pyramid of roles: handlers, couriers, fixers, and organizers. Each one had their place. Each one made the system stronger. At the top of the airport floor was Joyce Jury, the baggage handler with access to almost every corner of Heathrow. Close beside him stood Muhammad Ali, his trusted partner. But even the best insiders need someone to coordinate, to smooth over details, to make sure timing is perfect. That man was Priya Mungra, Jury's own brother-in-law. His job wasn't glamorous. He didn't touch the bags or step onto the tarmac. But his role was crucial. Mungra became the voice on the line, the constant communicator who kept the handlers in sync with organizers outside the airport. Whenever a flight was due in from Brazil, Mungra's phone lit up. Call logs later revealed that he and Jury were in near constant contact before, during, and after shipments landed. To investigators, those calls would become a map of the entire pipeline. But Mungra wasn't the only link. The network had its courier manager, Wilfred Osu, a man based in Stoke Newington. His job was to supply the faces in the baggage hall, people who could blend in, pick up a suitcase, and walk out like nothing had happened. And Osu had a method. Instead of sending couriers on the same international flights as the drugs, he placed them on domestic routes: Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen. Passengers from those flights faced no customs checks. They walked into the baggage hall with a kind of invisibility cloak. All they had to do was collect the bag already diverted by Jury and Ali. Think about that for a second. You could be standing in an airport, waiting for your suitcase, and right next to you someone is calmly wheeling away a case packed with cocaine, and no one suspects a thing. That's how ordinary it looked. That's how dangerous it was. Osu's pool of couriers was diverse. Dana Van Bull, 45, from Clapham. Moses Awapitu, 38, with no fixed address. Later, two women, Felicia Kuffer, a grandmother of 66 from Bedford, and Francisca Archer, just 26 from Stamford Hill. Each one received precise instructions. A photo of the suitcase would arrive on their phone, its brand, its color, the tags attached. Out of hundreds of cases spinning on the carousel, they knew exactly which one to lift. And once the handlers had done their part, the couriers barely broke a sweat. In minutes, millions in cocaine was rolling out the front doors of Heathrow. But the network didn't stop there. On the outside, Michael Sutherland, a 48-year-old from South Norwood, was one of the main organizers. He oversaw what happened once the cocaine left Heathrow's walls. He made sure it was distributed, sold, and converted into cash. Supporting him was Mark Agoro, 52, from Essex, a longtime associate who kept the operation moving, and Damien Goodall, 30, from Tooting, who liaised directly with Jury about collections. And because every machine needs logistics, they had more. Aziz Abdul, a trusted associate who helped couriers reach their destinations. Leona Townsend Bartley, 32, who worked in the shadows booking flights and hotels so the couriers were always in the right place at the right time. Together they formed a circle of 13 people, each role distinct but interconnected. A conspiracy where handlers, couriers, and organizers operated like the gears of a clock. If one gear stopped, the whole system stalled. But while they worked in harmony, from the outside it looked like chaos, just another day at the airport. And maybe that's the most unsettling part. These weren't masterminds living in luxury mansions. Many lived ordinary lives. Some had families. Others were drifting, broke, or simply chasing easy money. Yet, when they came together, they built a system powerful enough to slip drugs into Britain's bloodstream undetected. So let me ask you this: do you think ordinary people like Felicia Kuffer, a grandmother, deserved the same prison time as the organizers? Or were they pawns in a much bigger game? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate has divided people ever since. And if you've stayed with me this far, that tells me you're not just a casual viewer. You care about uncovering stories most people overlook. Don't just disappear after this video. Hit subscribe, because every time you do, it makes it harder for stories like this one to be buried and forgotten. For investigators, uncovering the full scope of the network took time. It wasn't enough to know about Jury and Ali. They needed to trace every connection, every courier, every message. And they were about to get their chance. Because a single suitcase wrongly placed on a domestic carousel had sparked suspicion. And from that moment on, the National Crime Agency began pulling threads. It would take months of surveillance, hundreds of hours of phone monitoring, and patience bordering on obsession. But slowly the truth was coming into focus. And soon the cracks in the pipeline would begin to widen. Every empire falls. And sometimes it begins with something so small, you'd almost miss it. For the Heathrow conspiracy, that moment came in 2015, a full year before the network came crashing down. Border Force officers flagged a single suitcase. It carried a Rio de Janeiro tag, but it had somehow appeared on a carousel reserved only for domestic flights. To most travelers it was meaningless. But to experienced officers, it was an impossibility. An international bag on a domestic belt? That wasn't just suspicious. It was the first crack in a system that smugglers had carefully built. That anomaly was enough to trigger an investigation. And once suspicion took root, Heathrow was no longer just an airport. It was a crime scene under observation. The National Crime Agency, NCA, was brought in. They didn't rush. Instead, they began with patience, slowly mapping the movement of flights from Rio, looking for patterns. And the patterns were there. Bags from Brazil consistently weighed more than average. The same weekday flights carried suspicious loads. And every time the same handlers appeared on CCTV, Joyce Jury and Muhammad Ali. Surveillance cameras captured them entering restricted areas on days they weren't rostered to work. Footage showed them driving baggage tugs, diverting containers and slipping into secure zones. For colleagues it looked like routine. For investigators, it was evidence of abuse. But cameras alone weren't enough. The NCA needed connections. They turned to phone data. They found that Jury was in constant contact with Priya Mungra, his brother-in-law. The call logs told a story of their own, spikes in calls every time a Rio flight was due in. Each call bridged the airport floor to the organizers waiting outside. And then came the breakthrough. The NCA intercepted encrypted BlackBerry Messenger traffic. Inside the messages were photographs, images of suitcases taken in Brazil, complete with tags and labels. Those images were sent to handlers and couriers in London, ensuring that everyone knew exactly which bag carried the cocaine. The pipeline wasn't a theory anymore. It was alive, operating in real time, under the noses of millions of passengers. Think about that for a moment. For over a year, families walked through Heathrow with no idea that just meters away, corrupt staff were wheeling millions in cocaine past security. Now here's my question to you. Do you think airport staff should face harsher sentences than couriers, because they held positions of trust? Or should the law treat them the same? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this debate cuts to the heart of justice. The investigation stretched on for 18 months. Surveillance teams tracked the suspects across London. Cafes, street corners, quiet meetings outside homes. One night, Jury was filmed meeting Damien Goodall in a public space. Another time, officers caught Asu speaking with couriers, handing them details of pickups. Piece by piece the puzzle grew clearer. By late 2016, the NCA had intercepted 6 consignments, seizing more than 100 kilos of high-purity cocaine and 44 kilos of cannabis. But investigators knew some shipments had slipped through. The priority was clear: dismantle the network before it grew stronger. And then, on December 15, 2016, the surveillance paid off. Felicia Kuffer, a 66-year-old grandmother acting as courier, lingered at the domestic carousel. Investigators watched as her eyes scanned the bags, searching for one suitcase in particular. She wasn't waiting for her own belongings. She was hunting. That hesitation confirmed everything. The network was real, visible, and operating in front of cameras. For the NCA, the time for quiet observation was over. The next step wasn't to watch, it was to strike. And here's where I need to pause. If you've made it this far into the story, you're not just a casual viewer. You care about seeing how hidden corruption is exposed. Most people click away long before now, but you stayed. That makes you different. And if you believe cases like this should never be buried, hit subscribe right now. Because the more of us who demand these stories be told, the harder it becomes for networks like this to operate in the shadows. The stage was set. After 18 months of patience, the NCA was ready. In the early hours of December 14, 2016, dawn raids were planned across London and the southeast. The baggage handlers who thought they were invisible were about to face the full weight of the law. And when the doors came crashing down, the Heathrow conspiracy would never be the same again. December 14, 2016. The clock hadn't struck dawn yet when National Crime Agency officers moved into position. Across London and the southeast, quiet neighborhoods became battlegrounds for a series of coordinated raids. The plan was simple: hit everyone everywhere at once. No warning. No chance to escape. At Heathrow, Joyce Jury, the baggage handler who had once strolled across the tarmac with untouchable confidence, was arrested on the very ground he had corrupted. When officers approached him, he didn't resist. Instead, he admitted something chilling: a sense of relief. As if the burden of his secret had finally become too heavy to carry. Not far away, his lieutenant, Muhammad Ali, was pulled from his home in Slough. Priya Mungra, the go-between, was detained. Wilfred Osu, the courier manager, was captured. Michael Sutherland, the senior organizer, was seized in South Norwood. By sunrise, 13 people had been taken into custody. The network that had once moved cocaine as smoothly as luggage had been dismantled in hours. When the case reached court, the scale of the conspiracy was laid bare. Judges at Kingston and Southwark Crown Courts spoke of a betrayal of trust so deep it struck at the heart of national security. Joyce Jury, 16 years. Muhammad Ali, 15 years. Wilfred Osu, 20 years. Michael Sutherland, 20 years. Priya Mungra, 13 years 6 months. Mark Agoro, 14.5 years. Damien Goodall, 11.5 years. Aziz Abdul, 9 years 6 months. Leona Townsend Bartley, 6 years. Felicia Kuffer, 6 years. Francisca Archer, 6 years 6 months. Dana Van Bull, 6 years. Moses Awapitu, 6 years 9 months. In total, the group received 139 years of prison time. Think about that for a moment. 13 people. From different walks of life. Together, they had built a pipeline that brought cocaine into Britain under the noses of millions of passengers. And together, they now faced more than a century behind bars. But here's the question: do you think those sentences were enough for what they did? Or should insider corruption be punished even more severely? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is about more than drugs. It's about trust. And when trust is broken at this level, the damage cuts far deeper than anyone realizes. If you're still watching now, it means you understand the weight of these cases. Most people click away when the sentences are read. But you stayed. That makes you different. And if you believe these stories should be remembered, subscribe right now. Because the more of us who keep these stories alive, the harder it becomes for corruption to hide in plain sight again. The Heathrow baggage handler network was dismantled. But corruption doesn't die with one conviction. Because 3 years later, another insider would walk through Heathrow's gates. Not a baggage handler this time, a security manager. And his betrayal would prove that the pipeline was far from closed. December 2019. Heathrow Airport. June Dar, a 47-year-old security manager from Slough, arrived for work 3 hours before his shift. Dressed in uniform, carrying the authority of his role, he looked like any other manager preparing for a busy day. But Dar's early arrival wasn't about security. It was about corruption. His position gave him access to secure airport vehicles, the kind that could cross airside zones and move between terminals without question. And that morning, his target was a flight arriving from Bogota, Colombia. On board were 2 couriers, Michael Williams and Jessica Waldron, both from Dudley in the West Midlands. Hidden in their checked luggage was what they believed to be 22 kilos of high-purity cocaine, worth around £2 million. But what they didn't know was that Colombian authorities, working with the NCA, had already intercepted the drugs. The cocaine had been swapped for identical wooden blocks. The bags were allowed to fly on not as smuggling tools but as bait. The operation was set. And Dar walked straight into it. When Williams and Waldron landed, they followed encrypted instructions from organizers in the West Midlands, Rufford Davis and David Farquharson. Both men coordinated the couriers step by step, sending identical screenshots of where to go and who to meet. Their destination? Dar. Waiting in uniform, he intercepted the pair, steering them into a toilet block away from surveillance cameras. There they handed over the bags. Bags they believed carried cocaine. Bags that now carried only evidence. Dar loaded them into his secure vehicle. But before he could leave, NCA officers moved in. In one coordinated strike, they arrested Dar, Williams, and Waldron. Soon after, Davis and Farquharson were taken into custody in the West Midlands. The entire network had been exposed in a single operation. In 2022, Williams and Waldron were sentenced to 6 years, 8 months each for attempting to import Class A drugs. In August 2023, the final hammer fell. June Dar, 16.5 years. Rufford Davis, 14.5 years. David Farquharson, 14.5 years. The judge described Dar's actions as a gross betrayal of trust, a calculated abuse of privilege that undermined public faith in airport security. So let me ask you, what's more dangerous, the traffickers who risk carrying the drugs or the insiders who sell out the system from within? Comment below, because cases like this prove that sometimes the most trusted people can do the most damage. And if you're still with me, you're not just here for the story. You're here because you care about the truth. Most viewers never make it this far. But you did. That makes you part of a very small group. So subscribe right now, not for me but so we can keep building a community that refuses to let corruption slip back into the shadows. The Heathrow conspiracies prove one thing: corruption doesn't disappear. It evolves. From baggage handlers to security managers, from Rio to Bogota, insiders continue to be the weak point in the system. And if you thought this was shocking, wait until you hear our next story, where a drug dealer tried to play smart by hiding drugs inside gas cylinders but was later exposed.